Enjoy this Wild Soul Gathering production. I'm Dr. Sandra Maria. Pour yourself a really tall glass of spiritual curiosity and join me for the happy hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. In the spirit of happy hour, cheers to some new insights, peace, revitalization, and perhaps an aha moment that may change your life. Hello and welcome to the Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious podcast. This is Dr. Sandra Maria, and today in the studio we have Cynthia Ambriz with us. Welcome to the show, Cynthia.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really grateful to have you here today. Cynthia, you're a spiritual therapist and coach. My question is, what is the added dimension of spiritual therapist from the traditional?
What I've discovered is that traditional therapy can keep us replaying the same experiences for a number of years and not necessarily bring about or facilitate a shift into the desired experience of the individual. When we're working with spiritual principles, we're bringing in the dimension of infinite possibilities. One aspect of it is also that we don't look at things as problems, but as creative solutions trying to reveal themselves to us. And that way it seems very different to me.
That makes sense. Spirituality is its own entity. I think it's the missing secret sauce to so many things in the world and society these days that is really starting to make itself known and being integrated. I think it's a beautiful thing that that's what you do.
It's interesting because it's what I used to dream of. I always knew I wanted to help people in some way. It wasn't until I healed my own things, or at least began the journey of healing, that I was able to then begin to sit with people. So they say you only ever need to be, like 2 steps ahead of somebody to be able to help.
That actually makes sense. I'll have to ponder on that a little more, but there's something about that resonated with me. You talk about facilitating a quantum transformation. The word quantum feels very big. I hear it a lot more frequently these days. It's been in my world for, I would say, a bit of a time here. And I know initially for me, I found the word scary and overwhelming. I just had a really hard time understanding the quantum. I come from a science background. I kept looking at it in this scientific way. When I let go of the science, even though it is science and they integrate together 100%, things started making more sense to me. So for the listeners, how would you describe quantum transformation, and maybe what would an example of that look like?
So, for example, we refer to it as the quantum flip. The possibility is that something can happen incrementally over time, right? Like peeling back the layers of the onion. But there's also the possibility that there can be an instantaneous shift, what we're looking to transform or embody. And sometimes it does happen that way. Sometimes it is incremental. Sometimes I have to work on a pattern over a period of time, but it's because of the gradual chipping away, that we create the possibility and the space for the quantum flip to occur. Let's say that I've been dealing with a health issue. I bought the diagnosis hook, line, and sinker from the doctor, that it was going to be a lifelong condition. And so then I'm working with a therapist, a spiritual therapist, or an energy codes facilitator. And we start going to work on the subconscious belief that this has to be a lifelong thing. But as I start to identify correctly as an individual that has the option of experiencing infinite possibilities, and I start letting go of my grasp on that lifelong diagnosis and leaning more towards, well, if anything is possible, health might be possible for me too. And I keep inching in that direction. And then all of a sudden I wake up one morning, I can accept wholeness as a reality for myself now. And it is our beliefs that have the effect on our biology, as Bruce Lipton has also written about, right?
Yes.
That our beliefs have a stronger effect on the biology than our genetic disposition. It can happen instantaneously, and sometimes there's still, some work that has to be done to get me to be able to allow that as a possibility.
Wow, that is huge. And that's a huge shift in the mindset in our culture because being sick is big business, right? There's a lot of dollars attached to it. There's a lot of self identification attached to it. There's a lot of things attached, as you said, we feel are lifelong sentences and that we have the power or the possibilities to actually rewrite and change all of that and change our lives is huge. It's a huge paradigm shift. Wow.
Right? And from the spiritual perspective, Yeshua said that it is done to us as we believe. And other great teachers have said that as well. So if I shift my beliefs, right? And what is it going to take to get me there? And that's kind of where I come in.
Nice. I could see the importance of the spiritual coaching with that. Could be a journey that would be hard to walk alone, although I'm sure there are people who've done it and done it successfully. Having someone help along that path and perhaps provide you some insights that are definitely ahas into your own connections because I'm going to guess it looks very unique for each person that you work with.
Absolutely. I'm always checking in. If an individual is coming to me and they're choosing to work with all of the modalities that I have trained in, I have access to something called Spiritual B.E.S.T, which is B.E.S.T stands for Bioenergetic Synchronization Technique. With Spiritual B.E.S.T, I help to clear the subconscious interference. So sometimes they want to experience a change, or let's say that they want to shift a habit. And for some reason, no matter how hard they try, it's not sustainable. I'm able to work with them to help them to clear whatever might be standing in the way. Let's say that somebody wants to enjoy themselves more in life. In their subconscious, they stored an experience of when they were 3 years old and they were having the time of their lives. They were drawing a picture for mom, but it turns out that they drew the picture on the dining room wall. They got them into trouble, right, when mom saw. In the subconscious, that got stored as don't do anything that's fun and don't do anything that's creative because it got you in trouble. And that's the way it got recorded and filed away in the subconscious. So as they become older, it's like no matter how much they want to let themselves have a good time, the second that starts to roll out, they shut it down. They're like, I have to go, or I can't allow myself to be in this relationship, or, they bring the experience to an end because of this subconscious belief that it's dangerous for them. So I help with that kind of thing.
That's really significant. I would have not gone down that path, and that's so logical. When you speak of it, it all makes sense. But to connect those events in one's life are not, I would guess, so easy to do and recognize them. So you spoke of your modalities. You do a couple of other things. I think that you're also involved with, you're a master trainer of the energy codes. If you could just talk a little bit about that. I think a lot of our listeners aren't familiar with a lot of these things. And I know, honestly, when it comes to the energy codes, we could do a whole separate show on this.
It's true. So I am a master trainer of the energy codes work, which was created by Dr. Sue Morter. It's called the 7 Steps to Healing. I teach a book study, which is more in depth than just a book study. I call it a book study / course because I facilitate a 12-week class where we read one chapter at a time. There's 12 chapters in the book. And this allows people to take in the information, and then we gather for 2 hours once a week to talk about any questions that come up. Because some find it, I guess, it's not information that you encounter every day. So I like to help people interpret and make it their own, translate it into a language that they understand. And then there are practices within the energy codes. What the energy codes actually are practices and teachings that help us to embody the rest of who we really are. If you think of, for example, an iceberg, how we only see 10% of the iceberg above the water, most people are only embodying about 10% of their invisible self, which what is referred to as like the higher self or the soul. And so through the energy code practices, we're inviting the rest of us, the other 90%, to move in fully into the body, into its home, to allow the body then and the mind to be in service to your soul so that you can fulfill your life purpose and your soul purpose here on earth from a place of ease and grace. Hopefully, doesn't mean that we're not going to have challenges. In doing so, we begin to heal as we bring more of the invisible part of us into this body, this vessel. We begin to heal mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually. A lot of us, because of the way that society is, we tend to live mostly in our minds. So it's like the soul only comes into about the level of the eyebrow because we're always up here. And the invitation is to bring it like all the way in to the body. And then a lot of people tend to breathe very shallowly. So there's a lot of breath work that we work with in the energy codes. And the second that you and I start breathing beyond the upper portion of the lungs and start breathing more deeply into the diaphragm, we turn off fight or flight. Most of us have been on fight or flight nonstop for years and are not aware of it. So the nervous system is always on high alert. The body cannot be at a state that allows it to heal and regenerate. It can't go back to homeostasis until we turn off fight or flight. So the practices of the energy codes help us do that through the breath work. We turn off fight or flight. The body can then become aware of the fact that the emergencies are over, and it can go back to healing, regenerating, creating the chemistries that allow us to experience health. The mind settles down because it becomes aware that the soul, the higher self, is in charge, and it takes its rightful place in the passenger seat. And then you and I can begin to consciously create a life that is fulfilling at the level of the soul by working with these teachings of the energy codes.
Very beautiful. I am certainly extremely guilty of living in the mind, that mental state, and have been doing a lot of work to step away from that and let the soul take over. And it's really interesting as I've talked with a lot of people. I'm really gifted to meet so many different people on their path and using different modalities, but breath work is definitely a core element in a lot of the different modalities, obviously, because it is a direct connection to all that is.
Dr. Sue refers to breath as spirit in the body. So when we take it in small increments, it feels like we're only allowing a small amount of spirit to occupy the body. And then when breath leaves the body, so has the soul, so has the spirit. So the invitation is to take it in abundantly all of the time.
Nice. I had the desire to take a deep breath just as you were saying that, and it is fascinating to me how you just physically feel different when you're doing that. You also describe yourself as a thought minister. I'm unsure myself of what a thought minister is. My mental self, which is, always on and moving along, could come up with the different scenarios of what that might look like, but I'm curious what it actually means.
It's actually a new thought minister. Agape is the spiritual center that I am, where I studied. I studied with Michael Beckwith at Agape International Spiritual Center. And Agape is a new thought, ageless wisdom spiritual center. And they say this jokingly. There's a movement called New Thought that has been around, I think, since like the 1960s. It was began by Ernest Holmes, who did not want to create a religion of any sort, but people were so inspired by his lectures that an organization formed itself and like named him the director, right? Their teacher, their founder. So being able to have a new thought while we are working with these ageless ancient teachings that have been around for eons. The organization that Agape stems from was called Science of Mind. And they work with prayer that is referred to as affirmative prayer. So it's different from Catholicism, where we memorize prayer. In working with this form of prayer, you're working with spiritual principles, which are eternal laws, and affirming what is true. So we're not necessarily asking or beseeching, but we're affirming that if God is wholeness and God created all that is, we can refer to God as life, the source of all of existence, but everything stems from that. Then that includes me, and its perfection must be my perfection. Its love must be the love that I am created out of. Its wholeness is my wholeness. Its peace is my peace. Its abundance is my abundance. And so these are thoughts that people have not necessarily grown up with. So even these thoughts alone can be new thoughts for an individual. It's being open to the infinite possibilities.
I love the interconnection with everything that you've talked about. Even though we've talked about them in a separateness, they're definitely not separate. They're one and they are interconnected, which I'm sure that you bring a little bit of all of that in together when you interact with people. I love the new thought. So initially when you think of a new thought, someone might take it as I've come up with some brand new concept that's never really existed before. Any thought you've not thought before is a new thought. And it's all part of the shift. It's all part of this. Well, it's part of the shift and it's part of the duality that I think is working its way out, and that you have the positive direction and then you have the fear-based connection. That all is a way to work your way through the fear and work your way out, right? That makes sense. See how that now I'm just talking out loud, how my mind thinks.
Yes, and I'm so and I love that you brought up the fear.
It's part of the shift of moving from this fear-based society and cultures that aren't just here in the U.S., but throughout the world. It's all out there and there's change happening, and they use the term shifts. Shift is making sense to me, especially as we're speaking. Everything that you've talked about talks about love, peace, positiveness. So it's just shifting from those old ways that have been there.
Right? And I didn't realize, like, as someone that experienced a lot of trauma in the first part of her life, I think I became aware that I was carrying fear in my belly. Like I could feel it right in my belly. And I think I became aware of it like in 1998 for the first time. It's like I'm just driving to work and all of a sudden I feel this anxiety in my stomach. And I was like, how long has that been there? And at that point I hadn't begun to address a lot of the trauma that I had experienced in life. So as I started to dive in to healing from all of that, Michael Beckwith said to me a couple of times over the years, like, I need you to let go of your fear. Because I used to feel like a feral cat. Like I knew that I wanted to feel whole and I was willing to do the work. And it was almost like I had to walk through an ocean of fear to do all the things that needed to be done. But I didn't realize that as somebody that wanted to wake up to higher truths, not only about herself, but about life and how it works, and I wanted to access higher levels of consciousness, I didn't realize that fear would prevent me from waking up to higher and higher degrees of truth. So I had to start to release that fear and eventually arrive at a place where I felt safe on the planet. A lot of that got cultivated by working with practices of the energy codes, because the only place that I can truly feel safe is when I'm spending time in here and within myself. How can I arrive at a place where, regardless of what is happening in my outside world, I still feel centered, grounded, and okay? And that's ultimately where we want to get to. Because if I am looking out there to determine whether I'm okay, then I'm not often going to feel okay. Does that make sense?
Very important words, makes total sense. And Cynthia, that's the perfect segue. Tell me about your new book, Life Finds a Way. Folks are raving about this book, totally raving about this book, and I think it's going to make a big difference. I'm eager to hear you share.
It started off as me writing my thesis when I was in ministerial studies, and my focus was on healing. I have an autoimmune condition, so healing has been the catalyst, like what has been driving this deep dive into spirituality, right? And all the various healing modalities. So I was like, well, what exactly is it that I'm healing from? It's not just the condition that's showing up in the physical body. So I ended up going back to the beginning of my life and becoming aware of conditions that were present early on. I used to get seizures from the time that I was born until the time that I was 5. But I remember that on this one particular day, I was getting ready for school and I was really excited because the class was going to go on a field trip to the zoo and I had never been. And my mom stopped me while I was getting dressed and she said, "You're not going to school today. You can't join them because you get seizures and they're going on a field trip." And I was devastated. I said to her, very matter of fact, "I promise you, if you let me go on this field trip, I will never have another seizure again." I must have been convincing because she drove me to school as the kids were getting on the bus. And she said, "Go ahead and tell your teacher what you told me." And I said it to Mrs. Yamaguchi. Before I knew it, I was on the bus and I was at the zoo and I was experiencing giraffes for the first time. And I remember at the end of the day, we had lunch at a nearby park and coming down a slide and putting my hands up in the air in the shape of a V for victory. As I started this journey of healing, I wanted to be able to access what it was that I had done then, right? She was very clear on what it was that she wanted to experience. So as I was writing the thesis that later became the book, I wanted to leave no stone unturned. And so I went back into my family lineage. What had been the patterns that had been in place? No one in my family prior to me had been spiritual. There were survivors. There was even like some black magic kind of thing that used to go on in our family. There was a love of money, of materialism. There was not a lot of love that had been shared. So looking at what it was that my mom and my dad had gone through, what their parents before them had gone through, letting them know that this was the direction that I was taking the lineage in. And they say that as we heal 7 generations forward and 7 generations back. So being that I have a 30-year-old son and I have 2 granddaughters, I was very motivated to heal as much as I could in this lifetime so that when it's time for me to pass the baton on to the next person that wants to continue to heal the lineage, they can pick up further along down the evolution of this healing. It was basically me looking at what needed to heal physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And the book is about the level 10 difficulty of experiences that I had from the time that I was born to about 2022. And granted that it was not as difficult the last 12 years. I arrived at Agape, I think, in 2012. What I had gone through previously are things that might cause the audience's jaw to drop as they read the book. Most people, have a handful of difficult experiences. And for me, it was almost like 38 years nonstop of level 10 and what I've done to heal all of that. The next book will be more on the how-to, but I couldn't share the how-to so much until this story was shared first.
Well, I think that's important because there's a lot of folks out there that are experiencing things that are unimaginable, but reality. And I think that makes it relatable. You too had similar, I mean, everything's unique, but there are a lot of things that there's commonality with, that you too experienced this, and this is what you've done. It lets people know that, hey, it can be done. When we were talking about the quantum transformation, we talked about the infinite possibilities and what could be. Yes, this applies to me too. Me too is included. A lot of times you can be so deep in that dark hole, man. It's like, this is for everyone else, but it's not going to work for me. I appreciate your willingness to really put yourself out there in a very raw form. Honestly, how you grow and what it looks like in the next year, the next 5 years, the next 10 years, just as the whole world globally is moving and shifting and changing so rapidly. So are we as our one, but so are we as that individual expression of the one, right? It's just amazing to see what it looks like and also know the importance of, like you said, it affects you as your individual expression, but it affects the whole world. It affects the globe. It affects your family. It affects generations. I love that we can heal past generations as well as future generations. And it affects the present. Ancestors went through a lot too, just as we have. That's, I guess, how we all got here, right?
Exactly. And I remember, when was it? I did not want to become a minister. I felt that I was serving already as a spiritual therapist and facilitating classes, spiritual classes. And I had a big resistance, but that was because of my fear of being seen, right? I was afraid of public speaking because I didn't like attention, because of the trauma I had been through, I think, when I was younger, right? I went to Sedona and I did a family constellation session. And my maternal grandparents came through. And my grandfather was, I think he had been a Freemason. He was American. He was born in Oklahoma, but left the States and went to Mexico without speaking the language and became a very successful businessman there. But he was very hard, right? He was not an emotional man. I remember telling him in the session when he came through energetically, this is the direction that I'm going in. I'm choosing to walk the path of the light. This energy, this waterfall of energy poured down and through me. So much so that the practitioner kind of had to come and stabilize me and grab me because I was swaying. And she said that was him giving me his blessing. So they say that our ancestors pray for us. You know, will she or he be the one to finally heal the lineage? So we are their answered prayer if we are willing to take that on.
That is truly beautiful. I can see the emotional moment in that. And I do believe that we have a spiritual team on the other side that's always there nudging us on or giving us the, what I call the spiritual kick in the ass. I tend to get a lot of those personally. I think many of that spiritual team is our ancestors as well as the angelics and, the masters and other people out there. Cynthia, how can the listeners reach you if they want to get in contact with you? All the different modalities and different offerings that you have?
So I have a website, and it's cynthiaambriz.org, O-R-G. It has a description of all the modalities that are available, and you can schedule a free 30-minute consultation to see if this is something that feels right for you.
Nice. I love that you do that and connect with people. Appreciate your willingness to be on the show and share and be one of those conduits for people. And hopefully you'll resonate with someone. And I know you will help them with their aha moment or their, you know what, I'm going to take a chance and step out of my safety zone here. It'll be okay. Any last words that always sound so ominous? Last thoughts that you would like to share with listeners?
Just to let them know that I feel that we no longer have to grow through pain and trauma, that we have arrived at a point where we can continue to unfold through ease and grace. And if that is an option, why not start to let go of the old model? All of us have these gifts that we are here to share. And I believe that it is in us cultivating these innate gifts within ourselves and then openly sharing them in whatever arena we find ourselves, whether it's corporate, or the education system or in the political system, that if all of us do that, just share what it is that we were created for, what comes natural to us, that we can begin to create a world that works for everyone, right? And the last, most important thing is allow love to be what matters most above everything.
Very important. Totally agree. Amen. Cynthia, I know you're committed to the evolution of humanity. Thank you so much for your work and service to others. Thank you so much for taking time out to be on the show. I know that your schedule has been getting busier and busier. For the person who didn't want to put themselves out there publicly, your life is blowing up in different ways. Congratulations on the book. Again, I think that it is going to affect people and change lives in ways that you'll know and in many ways that you'll never know. And to all our listeners out there, I do want to thank you for taking time out of your day to join myself and Cynthia. Until next time, remember to embrace that wild soul. Everyone have a great day. Thanks, Cynthia.
Thank you, Sandra.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wild Soul Gatherings Happy Hour for the Spiritually Curious. To learn more about our guests, please go to our website, wildsoulsgathering.com. We're very eager to hear from our listeners what you thought of the episode, topics you might like us to cover in the future, your thoughts on spirituality, questions you may have. Please feel free to send us an email at wildsoulsgathering@gmail.com. This is your host, Dr. Sandra Maria, sending each of you peace and love. Until we meet again, embrace your wild soul.